Welcome to the Delight Your Marriage podcast, the show where you hear from amazing and inspiring wives sharing their struggles, triumphs, and advice for this journey called marriage. Here's your host, Bella Rose.
Thanks so much for joining. This is Bella Rose, and I'm grateful that you're here on the podcast with me. If you have gone through anything in your marriage that any way resembles a porn addiction, whether it's adultery, whether it was your husband having wandering eyes, whether it's yourself just feeling kind of insecure in a culture that pretends like perfect bodies is the most important thing that we should all aspire to. I think today's conversation is going to be really important because we're talking about sharing the pain. And it's painful to find out about a sex addiction of our spouse. It's so painful. And it feels incredibly isolating. It feels like we're the only ones going through it. And because there's all this shame around it, especially in Christianity, it feels like we have to retreat from our Christian friends, our Christian circles, our people at church. They must not understand what I'm going through. And I want to just say the enemy wants you to feel isolated. He wants you to feel alone. He wants you to feel like this is a secret you can't share with anybody. But that's a lie, because God uses people to help us to get free from the strongholds in our minds. And so today I have a phenomenal conversation with Jen Ferguson. She was actually on the podcast before, but she's got an amazing story. She has been there. She has experienced the betrayal and the heartache from her husband's porn addiction. And she talks about how she shared, how she talked about it, how she got healing through prayer, through conversations with others, through counseling. Counseling, just an FYI, I think is huge. It's so important. I have done counseling many times. There are always times where we can be helped by someone to talk through what's going on in our hearts, what's going on in our minds, directing us closer to Jesus. So I just want to kind of give that as my caveat. Like, counseling is so vital. But that's not the only thing. There's plenty of other ways that God heals us through people. But I just wanted to give a plug for counseling because God can really teach people through it. All right, well, let's dive into our conversation with Jen and let's hear how God can give us hope even when we're in the midst of this significant battle. All right. Well, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me on the Delight Your Marriage podcast. I'm really excited. I've got Jen Ferguson with me. Hi, Jen.
Hey.
Welcome. I'm so glad to have you back. So Jen and I talked months ago, but it was a wonderful episode. You can either go to episode 67 or 68 to hear her story about really the pain that happened in her marriage. And that's basically what we're going to be diving into more, is really sharing your pain. And can you kind of, Jen, talk a little bit, for those that haven't heard the episode yet, or your previous episodes, just a little bit about your story, and then we're going to dive more into how you processed that and how you healed from that?
Sure. For many, many years, since my husband was in junior high until about probably 4 years ago or so, he was addicted to pornography. And I happened to catch him every single time, except for one time when he actually confessed to me, which was a huge breakthrough in our marriage. But I really struggled with I didn't even know that looking at porn could be an addiction. So we started there kind of in my naive place, moving to, okay, well, now I've caught you. You should be ashamed of yourself and therefore never do it again. To coming to the realization that this is a really powerful addiction that the enemy is using to destroy my marriage.
That's right.
And so, because of my own baggage, I thought the answer was to fix the problem and control him and make all these rules so that he couldn't do it anymore. And instead of really seeking God and allowing God to change his heart. And so the whole process, and that's what our book is about how did I let go of control so that God could really move, not only in Craig, but also heal all the things in me that resulted from the porn addiction, but even from my own past of needing to control and have power and make these kind of false safety nets for myself.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful that you are willing to be brave and stand up and share this story and this hardship, because as infrequently as people talk about this, it is so rampant in our society.
Right.
I mean, have you seen, like, in your interactions with people as you've, went forward and published this book, and have you seen like women coming out of the woodwork telling you about their stories?
Oh, yes. And it's
Wow.
really amazing. I've spoken with people on the phone or via email from all over the world. And what breaks my heart the most is that they don't have anyone or don't know of anyone that can share their pain and relate. And so they end up calling me someone who, or, finding me on Facebook or whatever, which I love, because I mean, the whole reason for us to tell this story is so that people don't feel isolated, that they know that this is a problem that so many people face.
Right.
But the more we talk about it, the more Satan's stronghold of shame evaporates. And
Yeah.
so, it's just kind of fostering this idea that porn addiction is not something that we can keep hidden under a rock, whether we're the addicted or the one married to the addicted.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that. Porn addiction is not something we can keep under a rock and assume it's going to go away.
Right.
It's not. And
won't.
and in the same way, whether you're the victim of the porn addiction, if you're receiving that, like your husband's addicted, your wife's addicted, something like that, or you're the person that is addicted yourself. And it's interesting. I've been reading a lot about habits recently, and it's just kind of something I'm really interested in. So I've been reading a lot about habits, and there's a habit called Better Than Before. I mean, there's a book called Better Than Before, and Gretchen Rubin talks about how there's basically two kinds of people. There's the moderator kind, and there's the abstainer kind of person. And the moderator is like, I could have one piece of chocolate a day and I'd be fine. And the abstainer is like, if I'm going to have any chocolate, I'm going to have the whole bar or 8,
Right.
or I'm not going to have any
Right.
chocolate at all. And it's funny because I think in our society, the society is pushing on us that porn is okay, and it's something you can do in moderation, and
Right.
it's okay. And we can, and that's just a healthy part of your sexuality.
Or normal.
Or normal. Yeah. And I think it's absolutely, I mean, obviously as Christians, we believe that it's the abstainer, like you have to abstain. There's really no option there, right?
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and what's really great though is, like, the Time magazine a few weeks ago wrote a whole article about the dangers of porn. So more and more secular psychiatrists, scientists, psychologists are saying that pornography is bad, not just because it's spiritual. Take the spiritual out of it. It is wrecking the brains of our children and our, men and women. It is changing the chemical composition of their brain, and that addiction has that. I mean, it's a power to grow and grow and grow. And you have to abstain from porn, or you will continue to escalate. It doesn't just magically get better.
That is so good. That is so helpful. You have to abstain, or it's going to get bigger. It doesn't just stay the same. It's a monster that wants to be fed over and over and over again. You have to starve it.
Right.
You have to starve
Right.
it. That's really good. I'm going to link to that. I'm going to find that article and link to it in the show notes. Thank you for that. Because I'd really like to look into that more. So again, we're talking about the wife that either she herself is struggling with porn. And I think I've read somewhere that it's something like a third of women either are, I think, actively struggling. So that's not including the women that have struggled in the past
Right.
with porn. And then secondly, we're also talking about the wife that is dealing with a husband that's struggling, or maybe he struggled in the past. So we're talking about sharing our pain in this arena. I mean, how does a wife start to even think of sharing it? I mean, there's so much around it. There's so much shame, like you said. How does she even begin to open up?
I think, there's so many things that go through your mind when you have a pain like this. And honestly, this was, gosh, when our first year of marriage, and we're coming up on 16 years. So
Wow.
16 years ago, I knew nobody that talked about porn. So I thought
Mm,
that my only option was to just deal with this by myself. And it wasn't until a few years later, when my husband became suicidal, that I had to reach out, because it was like,
oh.
now I was like, oh my gosh, I have 2 babies and a husband, and I it was like my cup just overflew. I couldn't keep it contained anymore. The lid flew off,
Wow.
it was out of the bag. And so I
Wow.
started with his parents, because his dad was a priest, and I was like, oh my
Oh,
gosh, and so I wondered if taken, if I had not let it get to that point inside me, where it took something as radical as, suicidal thoughts and words coming
mm,
out of my husband's mouth, had I been able to address some of that pain from the beginning. Because, I mean, I took my pain to God in a way like, here's my pain, Lord. I really need you to fix this. But because of my own issues with control, I thought giving it to him, and then I would just take it back and start figuring out what I needed to do, right? Instead of really listening to him to tell me about what this addiction meant and everything else. And so I think when this bomb drops in your lap, if you catch your husband, or if he comes to you and confesses or whatever, it's
yeah.
really important twofold for you to be able to communicate to your husband, this is a big deal.
Mm,
This is wrecking my heart, and I need to be able to talk to someone who's safe about this.
mm,
Because
mm-hmm,
it is his pain too. So it's like, you don't want to go and quote unquote out him or uncover him,
mm.
because
Right.
he's probably carrying a whole lot of shame. And then
Right.
honestly, a lot of men that are addicted are also pastors. So for it to
Mm,
get out in the wrong way through, and we know that churches are breeding grounds for gossip, it can just be bad
mm-hmm,
news. But so I think communicating to your spouse and say, I cannot carry this alone. I want to
mm,
be with you, and I want to work with you on this, but I also need a safe outlet. And then kind of talking with them, what does a safe outlet look like um, in this situation? Do I need to go to a counselor who understands what it's like to deal with sexual addiction, or to be married to someone who's, sexually addicted? Is there a
mm,
close friend or couple? A couple would be awesome, so that you
mm,
have a team of people working with you.
mm,
But really just kind of sit down and say, I need this. This is a requirement for me to be safe. Um,
mm,
let's brainstorm some people that we can both trust. Um,
mm,
and because and I also feel like it's so important to pray and ask God who is safe in this situation, because there could be
mm.
somebody that you think is perfectly safe, and given any other topic, they would be awesome and amazing for you. But
Right.
but
That's right.
porn, if they're in it with porn and they're not ready to acknowledge it, or if
Hmm.
they, if their husband is addicted and they're not ready to acknowledge it, or they have no experience and they think it's like,
Right.
this is not a big deal, dude, all men do this, that is not going to be helpful or fruitful, and
Right.
can even set you back further, because then you walk away thinking, I really am alone.
Right. Right. Or the woman that, like you said, is unaware, or doesn't even realize it's this huge epistemic issue. And she might be horrified and not even know what
Right,
to do, and
right,
just again, make you feel more and more isolated, more and more shamed.
right.
Totally agree. Okay. So I think the first step is really having that conversation with your husband to try to figure out who's a safe person that I can talk to about this, that we can talk to about this.
Right.
And it sounds like, you know, I remember a dear wife that I love very much. as I was just getting to know her, really early on in our friendship, shared that her husband was struggling with this in a group setting. And it was really hard to know how to respond, because if it were just she and I talking, I would really like just hold her and, have the opportunity to really figure this thing out and figure out resources and all this kind of stuff. But kind of like you said, it sounded instead, unfortunately, like outing him. And I think there was a lot of difficulty that, she was obviously hurting,
Right.
And so that was her response, was to do this. So I think that's like an easy, like, knee-jerk reaction, is to run out and get help. Tell whoever you need to, as long as you find someone to help you. But it's a little harder to say, this is the person that's hurting me, and I'm going to go to him and submit myself to him and say, can I talk to people about this?
Right.
Right.
Right. And I think, and that's part of that's where kind of boundaries come in, because he could say, whoa, no, there's no way, or this is not a big deal. You don't need to talk to anybody, and minimizing your feelings. And so I think in that sense, you say, I need to go to counseling for this. Like, it is not an option for me to be alone in this. We have to come up with a way out. And so what is great about counseling is they're not going to tell anybody about what's happening, So I think it's looking for, even if you can't tell your best friend at this moment, you can still find a place that will, honor your husband's wishes at that time without completely sacrificing what you need.
Right. I think that's good. And I think also it sounds like, Jen, being clear about what you need is very important.
Yes.
And communicating that clearly.
Right. Because you do have needs in this situation, and your needs are valid. And, but with anybody that's addicted to something that they, porn is kind of like a security blanket. And so when you say to your spouse, this cannot be a part of our marriage, like, we have to ferret this out and not do this anymore, it's kind of like you're ripping away their security blanket, because the porn is filling a need for them in a very unhealthy way, but this is how they're getting their needs met. And it's like anybody that has a drug addiction or an alcohol addiction, there's a reason why they have that addiction. And so they're going to need support in this process as well. So I think if you do the counseling, Craig went to counseling, and it was not a good experience. And we wrote about that in our book. So it's so important to really, just as you're praying for if there are friends that you want to share it with, praying about that counselor and making sure that they have a good understanding of what porn addiction or sexual addiction is about. Because not all counselors are aware of that.
That's interesting. Okay, well, let me just backtrack for a second and ask you about when you said porn is like a security blanket and they're getting their needs met. What kind of needs are you talking about? And how is porn like helping them go through life?
Well, in my husband's example, he when things were overwhelming in real life and he didn't have the coping skills or the capacity to deal with that, he would escape into this fantasy world where he could have control. He could feel like a man without actually having to be one. It was just a complete disconnect from operating in real life. And obviously it's fake. Like, it's a feel good. You feel good for however long you're engaging in it, and then you put it down and you've had that release, the hormones release, you get the high, you get the rush, but then it's like a sugar crash, right? Then it's like, absolutely. Oh my gosh, what have I just done? Because at least with Craig was a Christian when he was doing all this, and he could feel the conviction of the Holy Spirit, he couldn't, like, it wasn't enough at that time to convince him that there was another way to get his needs met, to actually get real help, to rely on God to help him through whatever part of his reality was too much. And I think, also Craig grew up to be very independent, and didn't know how to articulate his needs because he was afraid that they wouldn't get met. So instead of asking real people or asking me, hey, I am feeling X, could you please do Y? It was, well, I'm just going to take this need and give it to someone who can't hurt me and get this temporary fix. So basically, when you're asking your spouse not to use porn, you're taking away that temporary fix and that go-to where you find relief.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like also how we're talking about it as an addiction, because truly chemicals that are released in the porn experience does literally make the brain addicted to the pornography. So it's not only everything that you just said, but it's additionally a physical addiction.
Right.
And so just like the alcoholic goes to alcohol to deal with life, to have that coping mechanism, the overeater, like myself, I've had that in my past where I'll go to food to deal with that emotion, right?
Right.
And it's funny, we were talking about the abstainer versus the moderator. I'm more of the abstainer when it comes to food. Like, there are certain types of food I have had to cut out of my life completely because of the effects it has to me.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we can each identify things in our own lives that we can understand our husbands in a little bit larger of a degree, that if you think about this is helping him cope with life.
Right.
This is less about, is he attracted to you or is he not? That's not the question here.
At all.
It's how is he coping? Yeah, exactly. In fact, that's the wrong question. I think now, to circle back to what you're talking about with the counseling, finding a counselor that understands porn addiction is vital, because the societal refrain is, well, then the wife must not be putting out or something like that. And that's not at all what we're talking about. What would you say to a wife that is thinking that way? Like, it must be my fault. I must be the one at issue here.
Right. Well, I would say pornography is not about sex. It's about fantasy. And so you could, and even if you tried to become this fantasy, which would be to your own detriment, most likely, it's not the same. Like, because you are attached to real life. You come with real life emotions, real life problems, real life, awesomeness too. But it's real life that he's trying to escape, not because you're not enough to fulfill his fantasy. It's a completely separate kind of thing.
Yeah. Yep. And so when someone who's looking for a counselor, what are some things that they can do to find the right person?
I would definitely do your research. Call, ask questions, get referrals, as much information that you can gather. I mean, I would say even calling, asking for a phone interview and saying, this is our problem. How would you begin to address this? And if it's only kind of behavior therapy, because every addiction has that root. So you want a counselor that understands that this is an escape from some sort of trauma or baggage from their childhood or young adulthood or whatever. Because with Craig, the first time he looked at it, it was that, junior high boy. Whoa, like there's that. But then to continue to keep turning to it bit like Satan is really tricky with this. And so it just ended up enwrapped in folding him or whatever. Like Satan used it to say, see, this is how you can get your needs met. See, they're not going to do it right by you. You're alone. You're isolated. You need to turn to this, And so I think even going to a Christian counselor who understands sexual addiction is so powerful, because, I mean, Jesus is the one that set Craig free and was able to really heal the wounds from his past. And the ultimate answer for Craig was, I need to turn to Jesus instead of porn. But it's a spiritual battle. And so to have someone who understands that there is spiritual warfare attached to this addiction is incredible, just an incredible weapon in your arsenal.
Yes. And you know what? That is a huge piece that I think a lot of times we as wives miss, because we're so wrapped up in the pain and the hurt, which is very valid and very true and very much happening. But it's very hard to see outside of that and say, what spiritual ramifications are happening? I mean, how were you able to see it that way?
Well, once I realized that porn wasn't about me, it really enabled me almost to like step back as a kind of like an outside of your body experience and look at the situation not through my eyes but through God's eyes, and in that I was able to access compassion for my husband, which is, I mean, if we carry around this pain inside of us, it hardens into anger, and then where are you going to go? Like, it's very hard to access love and compassion when you have to jump over this huge wall of anger. And it's very hard to pray when you're angry. Like, to really pray and intercede for your husband with anger is hard, you know? And that's why,
Yes.
yeah. So that's why I think it's so important first for you to hear me, ladies, that this porn is not because you're overweight or because you're underweight or because your boobs are not big enough or you have wrinkles
Right.
on your crow's feet or whatever. This is not about your
Right.
exterior experience. This is about your spouse's inability to have an intimate relationship, and they are afraid, and so they're running away. And so that's why I mean, counseling, or a trusted couple or a pastor, whoever understands what intimacy, an intimate relationship with Jesus, and an intimate relationship between a man and a woman is so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to reiterate, I'm so grateful you said that. This porn addiction is not about you, your exterior, the way you look like, that kind of thing. That's not what this is about. It is about your spouse's inability to be intimate.
Right.
And that's vital. I mean, I think in the same breath of that is the additional understanding of this is his way of coping with hard things. And when I've even had conversations with wives that they just don't want to fight it anymore. They're just like, well, that's what he does sometimes.
Right.
And that's not okay. That's not what God has, because in Proverbs, I believe it's Proverbs 5, it says that adultery destroys a man's soul. And that's what it is. Porn is adultery,
Right.
is internal adultery. Well, that's what Jesus says. When you lust after a woman with your eyes or in your mind, you commit it in your heart. You're actually committing adultery. But if you can imagine the wrecking, I love the perspective of spiritual warfare, because think about it. Our purpose in marriage is to prepare our husband, our spouse, for eternity. We are the one that's closest to them. We are the iron sharpening iron. They are preparing us. We're preparing them. By serving each other, we are in preparation for eternity, for being Jesus' bride. And so if you think about this as a spiritual a spiritual attack, and a way that you are the opportunity for him to grow into the person he's supposed to be, it changes the whole perspective. It changes your perspective on this is a spiritual thing. This is something that he's doing that is not in line with God, and you are fighting to save his soul. I just think that's a whole different perspective than yes, there's pain. Yes, there's anger, all that stuff, like you said, and that has to be worked through. But I think eventually to get to a place that this is a spiritual warfare, this is something that you can take arms against. How are you going to be protecting your husband from this? How can you help him? I mean, what do you think about those things?
Oh, I totally agree. And even more so, to build off what you said about, we're iron sharpening iron together. Marriage
Yeah.
is also supposed to be the depiction of how Christ loves the church and that relationship. And so if you bring in this betrayal into a marriage, it's eventually, even if people are not seeing the porn addiction, they're going to see that there is an issue, right? Because we can't access true intimacy with Jesus when we have this big piece of blackness, sitting between us.
Right.
And I think
Right.
too, like, and if we can
That's
have
so good.
a perception that porn addiction is a battle and that we are engaging in a war, not only are we praying over our husbands, but it reminds us to pray over ourselves, because
Yeah.
lies are powerful. And when you have a society that is saying, well, women should look like this and talk like this and act like this and be everything, you should
Right.
be the powerful CEO and then the also nurturing mother all at the same time, every day, every
Right.
hour. I mean,
Right.
there is so much room for attack on women and on you. And so for you to be
Right.
engaged in interceding for your husband, you can also be engaged in interceding for yourself.
Yes. 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 That is so, so true. And there's so much to it because the enemy wants you to doubt yourself, to doubt your sexual abilities, to doubt your everything. He
Your
wants to
role.
bring doubt.
Right.
And the thing, and our society, right, is all about that, like to make you feel like you're not able in every way to do what you're supposed to do as a wife, as a mother, as this or that, as a follower of Jesus. And it's just a lie. So how does, oh gosh, I feel like we could talk so much more about this, but we're wrapping up. So I want to just kind of ask you, how does a wife, maybe some practical steps, let's get to the here and now. Like, what are some things that would be good for her to really start doing?
Well, I think for sure, sharing. You were talking about sharing your pain.
That's
Let's
right.
be really, really real with God, because
Yeah.
when I'm sharing my story in the first chapter of our book, Pure Eyes, Clean Heart, I pretty much verbatim write down the conversation that I had with God on that Mother's Day when I caught Craig looking again. And I said, why the hell did you think that this was a good idea for me to marry this person? And I listed all of the pain that I had gone through in my life, and I was like, and you're going to give me this? Like, what is going on? And I
Mm,
think it's so good to be able to, because that's what intimacy is, like to be able to
yeah.
tell God anything that you need to tell him. He can take it. He is really big and he is really able and he understands. Like it says, we have, Jesus understands every single
Yeah.
emotion. He walked this earth just so we
Yeah.
would know that he really does understand and he hears us. And so I would say, first, share your pain with God. Second, talk to your husband about finding a safe outlet for you. In Galatians 6, it talks about that we are to share each other's burdens, and this fulfills the law of Christ. That is obeying the law, because the law is love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So we are not designed to carry a burden like this by ourselves. And Satan wants us to
Mm-hmm.
be isolated, and he wants us to feel that shame and that oppression. And the
Mm-hmm.
fastest way we can get out of that is bringing it to the light,
Mm.
to people who we can trust and who have the ability to give us compassion, to not say this is, if you share it with someone and they say, oh, men do that, you just stop that
Right.
conversation, bless them, and go find
That's right.
someone else, because that is
That's
not the truth.
right.
And the last thing you need is to be having conversations with someone who is furthering the lie, you know.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and
That's right.
so then it's prayer. I mean, prayer is part of this whole process, right? So it's
Yeah.
always, but as far as the spiritual warfare, there's a book by Beth Moore called Praying God's Word, and it's
Mm.
about all of these different strongholds, and one of them is sexual strongholds. And I would sit down every day and I would read these scriptures that she had turned into prayers, and I would pray them over my husband,
Oh,
because prayer is our the sword of the spirit is the word of God, and then
mm-hmm.
praying his word over our husband, it makes a big difference. And even if we can't see that immediately, we just have to trust and have faith that it
Yeah.
is chipping that wall. And I was talking with someone just the other day whose husband is struggling with this, and I said, we as wives would love to just rip the wall down, right? And just take that security blanket, whatever, and just rip it down so that it will be gone, because that's what's safe for us. But I said, think
Mm.
about your husband and how if God just ripped all of that away, how much
Mm.
fear and how much sense of exposure and just lost, like, oh my gosh, how do I cope? I mean, it's just a hard thing.
Yeah.
So I said I think God is so gracious
Yeah.
to have that chisel, and he just slowly chisels
Mm.
away, and he woos us, because
Mm.
relationship is about wooing, and it's about building trust. And so as he
Mm.
takes one stone down, then he gives him something else that is good and holy and life-giving to
Mm-hmm.
feed him. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, you have to have a trade-off. You can't just take away everything and expect people to cope through life. You have to give them new tools, but that's a process, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny. It's interesting because, um, yeah, I'll save that for another time. But I'm so grateful. This is exactly right because it is a process. You don't want to get to this mode of it's all or nothing. Like you're either failing or you're succeeding. Like you're either a failure. You
Right.
know, and I think there's even a part of that you're a partner in this with him. You're
Right.
helping him fight this. You're helping him in these areas. And of course that's not an easy place to get to. And of course there's anger and pain and healing that has to happen. But I love, Jen, your heart of going through this process. And I think, Clean Eyes, Clean Heart is a really great resource that people can go through that process with you, Jen, to really get through this. So tell us where they can find you online and how they can get a hold of your book.
Yep. So we have a website called pureeyescleanheart.com. And on there, there's some articles that I've written for Covenant Eyes. There's some periscopes that I've done that just really share my heart and some practical ways that Craig and I have worked through this porn addiction. And Pure Eyes Clean Heart is on Amazon. You can check your local bookstore too. Uh, but yeah, and you can contact us through Pure Eyes Clean Heart if you just need someone who understands what you're going through. We are both available to talk with you, and just we don't. God is the answer, and God has the
Yeah.
solution. But it's
Yeah.
so helpful for you to be able to share your pain with someone who understands where you're going and
Mm,
what you're grappling with, because this isn't there's not a quick fix, and that's what's
right.
sometimes so hard for people to understand, because they don't want to believe that something could take so long, right? Because
Mm,
every time it comes up, you feel that pain of that initial betrayal again. um,
mm,
so you need people, even if you're 2 years out and then there's a slip up. Like, you're gonna need
mm.
someone to be like, oh my gosh, tell me that this is not, that we're going back to square one, because you're not going back to square one. Like,
That's right.
God's
That's right.
God's healing has not been erased. God's progress
That's
has
right.
not been erased. Um,
That's right.
but we are human, and sometimes we give in to temptations, even though we know, like, that it could that it's not going to be good for us, right? It's like when you
That's
choose to
right.
eat the fifth chocolate bar, it's
That's
not going to
right.
be good for you.
That's right. It's so true. And I think, as wives, if we can understand it in the ways that we're struggling with sin,
Hmm.
we might not be struggling with porn, but we are struggling with sin. And
Right.
to understand that's just to give our husband a little bit more grace, um, I think is powerful and important. And again, Jen, I'm so, so grateful. I think you've given some really wonderful insights. I want to summarize the last three things that you said, kind of practical steps is one, Jesus really does understand. He really does. So to be really, really honest and share with him what's going on in your heart. I'm a journaler. It's really much easier for me to share the hardest emotions
Hmm.
when I'm just writing it out, when I'm actually like putting my thoughts into words. So that might be something that people can find some solace in. The other thing is talk to your husband about who's going to be safe to share your pain with.
Right.
Um, yeah, that's really important. And you mentioned before we were on the call, there's a book called Safe People, right?
Right. It's by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, and it really helpful in learning. And they also have a book called Boundaries. So,
I love that book. Hmm.
it's really figuring out how boundaries make you a safer person, and if you because you do need to advocate for your needs, but you need to advocate for them in a way that is not confrontational and adversarial, but instead, okay,
Yeah.
this is, I need to feel safe in our marriage. And so what are ways that we can agree on that we can both feel safe? What I would feel safer if you installed Covenant Eyes on,
Hmm.
on the computer, but but understand that's not going to solve the problem. That is a, safety measure, but but
Yeah.
addiction is about a root. So you still have to
That's right.
know
That's
that
right.
this is about developing intimacy and going back and allowing God to heal those places that allowed this addiction to take root. So you know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? So it's always
That's right.
remembering this is a heart issue.
Mm-hmm.
And his heart is sick or is broken, and so
Mm-hmm.
we need God's healing power to be involved in that. And covenant eyes won't bring that healing. Only God can.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
but figuring out, like, what do I need to feel safe in this? How can I remain engaged in this marriage when I feel hurt? How can I keep walking toward light?
Mm-hmm.
Because porn addiction can be very confusing. It's not, it's like we as a society,
Yeah.
we say adultery is wrong. Like
Yeah.
that's in the Bible. There's nothing about
Right.
specifically porn. Like the word pornography is not in the Bible. So it gets muddled in our heads too. So
Mm-hmm.
just praying for clarity and that God would continue to reveal what it is that is part of the solution.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That is so good. Cool. Well, okay. So go to pureeyescleanheart.com for more information about Jen, to follow her, to reach out to her. She's obviously got a very warm heart and very
Thank you.
amazing, amazing testimony and insights from that. So follow her there. I'm going to have the links to everything that we've talked about on the show notes. So you're welcome to go to delightyourmarriage.com to find those. But Jen, seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for this conversation.
Yeah, it's been awesome. I really appreciate you having me back.
So grateful for Jen's heart, aren't you? I mean, it's amazing when other people have gone through what you're going through and they can get to the other side and say, man, there's hope. It sucks right now. It is a really, really bad season, but there is hope on the other side. And that's what Jen actually ended the conversation with me. We chatted a little bit after, and she said, I'm so grateful that I can share hope with women in the midst of the pain, because I was there and I'm on the other side now. So I hope that is what you've come out of this, sharing the pain and keeping that hope, protect that hope. That's what God wants for us. He is the God of hope, as it talks about. I believe it's Romans 15. I was looking at it the other day. I'll reference that verse in the show notes, so in case I'm wrong, whatever the scripture is. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me. God bless you. Praying for you and your marriage. We'll talk next Tuesday.
Thanks for listening. If you've been blessed by this, why not share it? Until next time, live with love, wisdom, and passion.
So next week, I'm going to be talking solo show about how to find the love of your life. Yes, this is the strategy, step-by-step secret, I think, that really God honors. It's just wisdom around how to find the love of your life. So obviously, if you're married, you've already found that person. But if you're not, or you know some single friends, or maybe your kids or something, I've got just the wisdom that I think God affords in this life that with his help, we can employ. So at least come and listen if you can. That's going to be next Tuesday. God bless you. We'll talk then.